With the passage of antitrust legislation, such as the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, Congress sought to gain control over the potential for commercial interests, specifically of the scale of Standard Oil and the American Tobacco Company, to in effect dictate federal fiscal policy and reshape the social fabric of the country. These laws were somewhat effective in the short term, but the simple truth is that now, 120 years later, corporate institutions of a certain size and temperament have arguably as much or more power to shape the federal regulatory process meant to check their potential for harm as the citizenry does. A series of Supreme Court decisions, as many of you know, because the most recent of them has played such a significant role in the funding of political campaigns in 2010, has all but completed the transition for some corporations from regulated businesses, ordinary institutions like neighborhood privately owned grocery stores, to fully enfranchised individuals enjoying freedoms the Founding Fathers never intended institutions should have, and enjoying an access to political power they would have considered disastrous. Of the many things that are on the table for us to worry about, this one, the one by which figuratively the polluter is allowed either to self-regulate or, failing that, to devise the laws by which he is regulated, would be of no more concern than the others, like global climate change, were it not for the fact that corporate money is now profoundly changing the face of the American electoral process. In the past, politicians confronted each other with opposing ideas about how to run the country and ensure the health and survival of the people. Today, when the citizenry is overwhelmed with information but struggles to find a coherent narrative to hold all the information together, say, for example, how Wall Street gambling played into the 2008 housing collapse, corporate money is suddenly here by the unprecedented fistful to offer a narrative through the campaign speeches of vehicle candidates, people who speak for an ideology, most often an economic ideology, and not for a citizenry. When a lot of money turns up in a campaign today, it's good to know not only who sent the check, but what they expect for it. To think that nothing but a thank you note will be required is political naivete of the first order. I came here this evening to host an event in support of Peter DeFazio, who did not see a word of what I've said tonight and whom I did not consult over any of my thoughts. But I would feel derelict in my duties, oblivious to the privilege and responsibility that go with standing up here this evening, if I did not try to speak about some things that trouble us all as citizens, some of which have been illuminated in the back and forth between the candidates for the seat in Congress occupied by the representative of the 4th Congressional District of Oregon. To be candid and unambiguous, because I've intended my presentation this evening to be more about our grave needs as citizens than about any one man's qualifications to be our representative, I need to say that I have felt blessed to be represented all of these years by Peter DeFazio, that I have found him to be a courageous human being, realistic and savvy about how positive change can occur in the bowels of this behemoth we call the federal government, and in every conversation I have ever had with him, to possess a genuine concern about basic human needs, the fundamentals of human dignity, and what real politics dictates about political accommodation in the increasingly rancorous and polarized halls of Congress. I'm at ease giving him my vote and turning myself to my own duties as a citizen, to work that I can do to augment what he is trying to do. Only one of our community goes to Congress, but if the rest of us take into consideration what intimidating things stand now on the horizon, and vote for the person who we believe will manage the coming confrontations best, and if each of us takes seriously the idea of finding some place in our lives for acts of citizenship, and does not judge the lives of others whose struggles we are not fully informed about concerning the caliber of their citizenship, we'll do fine. We'll do fine with this experiment in democracy that Mr. Jefferson, Mr. Adams, Mr. Franklin, and the rest, imperfect men, all hoped we would advance through dark forests, the like of which they never imagined. Before I read a couple of short pieces, I want to risk raising the ire of anyone here who is puzzling over the legitimacy of some of the statements Mr. DeFazio's opponent has made, or is accused of making, about two subjects: global climate change and the supposedly innocuous effects on human beings of low doses of radiation. With regard to global climate change, it is useful to point out, as has Tim Flannery, an expert on global climate change in Australia, and a scientist and a very good writer, that the mathematics that go into creating the computer models that predict a number of different paths for global climate change are exceedingly difficult to master. Mr. Flannery stood up in front of a large audience in Lubbock, Texas a couple of years ago and spoke about global climate change and was challenged by a man in the audience who said that 12,000 scientists had signed a petition, as he called it, saying global climate change was not taking place, and to assert such a thing was to perpetuate a hoax. Mr. Flannery answered politely that it was not possible for 12,000 scientists to object to the existence of global climate change because only about 200 scientists, mostly atmospheric chemists, can actually understand the math used in virtually all of the computer modeling. And these 200 people are all in agreement that global climate change is here, whatever the cause. At the same time I heard Mr. Flannery speak, I had a chance to talk with a woman named Catherine Hayhoe, an atmospheric researcher in the Department of Geosciences at Texas Tech University. Ms. Hayhoe was a member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. She is also an evangelical Christian. She wrote a book that came out last year called A Climate for Change with her pastor, Andrew Farley. It was Ms. Hayhoe's intent, as someone intimate not only with the mathematics of global climate change modeling, but with the potential devastation humanity is looking at, to address the concerns of her fellow evangelicals about disagreements over global climate change. Evangelical Christians, she told me, like many others, simply want to know what is going on and how it will affect their families. And their doubts too often are dismissed by those on the left as evidence that they are poorly informed or ineducable. I wanted to say to them, she told me, your questions are legitimate, and they deserve respectful attention. And I am one of you. And here's what I know. Ms. Hayhoe's compassion here seems exemplary. As both a scientist and a profoundly religious person, she seems the epitome of an American citizen today. In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, a watershed book, of course, about the dangers of insecticides. She was mocked and vilified by the executives of companies who manufactured insecticides and critiqued by scientists in the employ of these companies. Among the most pathetic of efforts to refute her findings, which were to change entirely the way these industries were perceived and regulated, was the on-camera performance of several scientists and industry executives who sprinkled their cereal with DDT and proceeded to eat from their bowls with glee and feigned indifference. The question for these men, if you can imagine it coming from someone like Ms. Hayhoe, is, what are you afraid of? So afraid that you would do this to your body. Last year, when Bill McKibben was organizing an effort to bring worldwide attention to the existence of what you might call a very good guess threshold of 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, if we hope to deal effectively with the impact of global climate change on agriculture, freshwater reservoirs, and so on, he asked several writers if they would write exactly 350 words on global climate change. I had other things on my mind that seemed more pressing, but I felt compelled to help. And I said to Bill that I had only one question: could I write not another exhortation, but send him a piece of fiction? He said, fine. So this is that piece of fiction. It says here a short story, 350 words. It's called The Trail. On a winter afternoon, along a trail in the Sierra Madre in the state of Mensajero, beneath an immense rampart of rising cumulonimbus cloud, a deeply imperfect man bent over to collect a small piece of black glass. He recognized its kind, obsidian, a thick sliver of it. When the molten interior of the earth is thrown into the frigid sky and cools quickly, it becomes a stone like this. People say of its edges that no knife is sharper, and of its color that it is transparent but bottomless, like the seas, so it cannot be rendered on paper or canvas. The man turned the spalled flake over in the palm of one hand with the fingers of the other. He tested the edge with his thumb and held it up to the sun. He knew of no volcanoes in these mountains, but the trail was many centuries old, and people had carried red coral, abalone shells, and turquoise up and down it for generations. Someone dropped this, he thought, in the time when his grandfather was alive, or in the year of his own birth, or a pilgrim might have dropped it only days ago. It glittered in his palm like sunlight and ice, and he wondered as the heaving clouds encroached on the sun and the shard of glass darkened what his obligations were. Should he give it back to the trail or pocket it for the single daughter he was traveling to see? In another age, he would not have hesitated to take it to the girl. Now he felt he must put it back, even if later someone else might take it. He believed he had come upon a time in his life when everything, even the things of God, needed protection. When he met his daughter, he would tell her he had found a black tear in the dust of the narrow path and understood he must leave it. And she would ask him whose tear it was, and he would have to use his imagination in the way his people had once done.